And here you thought there was no way I was going to be able to talk about McGann anymore. Ha! When the Big Finish radio plays kicked off in 2000, of course, it kicked off with Peter Davison, Colin Baker, and Sylvester McCoy all reprising their roles. And with the success that that was generating, it did garner the interest of Paul McGann himself, especially when Big Finish just offhandedly asked, hey, would you like to come in and record radio plays with your doctor to hopefully give you a chance to do more with your character? And because he did, we're talking about one of those Big Finish radio plays here today. And I picked this one up at the Doctor Who convention in LA. And first off, if you ever get out there, you will be spoiled, because the dealer room there is pretty much all Doctor Who everywhere. And a lot of it is stuff that you never thought you'd ever see without either going to Britain or digging deep into eBay in order to find a lot of it. It is awe-inspiring. But my first goal was to pursue Big Finish, because I was aware of Big Finish because they did the animated webcast of Shada, where they replaced Tom Baker with Paul McGann. I knew that there were more radio plays with Paul McGann, so I asked the very, very attentive people running the table what would be the best one to start with. Now, I have no idea why they didn't just recommend Storm Warning to me, but the one to which they recommended was Blood of the Daleks, Part 1, Part 2, by Steve Lyons. Now, this kicks off a very interesting period in Big Finish's history. Around this point, Doctor Who was really exploding once again in Britain, and the BBC, logically, probably wanted to milk the cash cow as much as possible. Big Finish was still running all their radio plays, and they decided to commission Big Finish to have actual seasons of the radio plays. They chose to have an ongoing series with the Eighth Doctor, and I'm assuming it's because there's so much wiggle room to play with the Eighth Doctor as far as his history and his continuity. They opted for multiple seasons with a consistent arc. It was almost as if they were trying to bring the classic Doctors into the new narrative structure that was introduced with the new series. And with that, of course, they were going to introduce a new companion and an entirely new dynamic. And the companion they conceived for this run was a drastic change compared to the companion that most people knew and loved in the Big Finish radio plays with the Eighth Doctor, of course, Charlie Pollard. Lucy Miller, played by Sheridan Smith. I don't know if I could praise Lucy Miller enough as a character. She is easily, if you had to put a gun to my head and rank my favorite companions, easily Lucy Miller will wind up in my top 5. And the fact that she's a no-nonsense rock chick paired up with Paul McGann's Doctor, who is, especially the Paul McGann we might remember from the TV movie, he's very, proper, very old-fashioned romantic hero type. It's a wild, contradictory dynamic that you could ever pair with. In a way, it's kind of the same dynamic you could imagine with Ace and the Seventh Doctor. Just the idea of these two mismatched characters who you shouldn't go together, but they do. Now, if there's anything that the Fifth Doctor and Tegan has proven, is that if your companion Doctor dynamic is too antagonistic, it can really get irritating. But they were able to find that wonderful balance with Lucy and 8, where, anytime she's either sarcastic or she's, complaining, it's the kind of thing that any of us would complain about, but then she bounces right back and she's in the thick of it, and she's either having a great time or she's willing to jump in and help out. And she establishes that really early on. She's an immediately relatable character, and I think the thing that made her so relatable was the way her first opening scenes were written. Now, to get into that, let's get into the story. The story begins with something of a whirlwind. It kicks off, all of a sudden the TARDIS is going haywire, the Eighth Doctor is like going, who the devil is this person who just appeared in the TARDIS out of nowhere? And Lucy's freaking out because all of a sudden she's in a room with this, very fancy looking person in a big cavernous control room, and she's quipping that the controls on the TARDIS are held together with duct tape, and things are going crazy. And then the TARDIS stops, the Doctor asks, who the hell are you? And, well, that's the thing that makes this companion dynamic much more fascinating. You see, Lucy Miller did not join the Doctor by choice. In fact, this is one of the rare times where a companion is put upon with their Doctor. Well, Lucy is actually foisted onto the Eighth Doctor because of a quote-unquote witness protection scheme on the part of the Time Lords. And unfortunately, she doesn't really know much beyond that. She knows that the Time Lords dumped her on the doctor. And the only other thing she remembers is that she was on her way to work for her first day on the job, a job that we don't know yet. There's a great air of mystery with Lucy. We know that she's with the doctor for a very important reason, but we don't know what it is. She doesn't know what it is, and the doctor doesn't know what it is. And the thing that irritates the doctor more than anything else is that he can't get rid of her. He can't go anywhere without her, and even worse, he can't drop her off back in her own time stream because the Time Lords have time locked it. So he's stuck with her, for all intents and purposes. So naturally, the two of them are butting heads almost immediately because it's not a particularly desirous situation for the two of them. And it's made worse when they end up on the planet Red Rocket Rising, a planet which has suffered a serious comet strike, which has covered pretty much the entire planet in ash, soot. It's not a habitable place to live, and this was a place that was a Earth colony, and now you have all the survivors scrambling to stay alive. They're gathering whatever they can, and the only elected official who's still there trying to rein in the madness is not particularly popular with the masses because, well, what else can she do? And the Doctor and Lucy meet her when she's transporting a prisoner, a woman named Asha Griven, who was working for a, well, morally reprehensible scientist named Martez. And as the Doctor investigates further, she finds out that this Dr. Martez was experimenting with alien technology. You clicked on this video, so you know exactly what alien technology the guy was messing with. So because the scientist was messing around with Dalek technology, this was shooting up a flare to get the Daleks' attention. And what this scientist is specifically doing with that technology is something that the Daleks are not happy about. This is a pretty epic story to kick off a Doctor-Companion dynamic. It's a bigger story than most. I mean, most companion introductory stories usually tend to be kind of a small affair because they always like to use the ordinary to introduce the companions to make it relatable. This is one of those rare times where they just throw the companion into this big, crazy situation, and I will say it's a good way to start with, particularly with this character. A lot of times, the thing that defines how good a companion is going to be is the trial by fire. And I gotta say, the thing that's fun about Lucy Miller is because of her antagonistic introduction to the Doctor, she's not willing to do what he tells her, and so she's running around just trying desperately to get away from him, and she ends up in the lap of the Daleks, and that leads to some pretty fun scenes. And normally, when a companion is doing things which we as Doctor Who fans know is not the right way to go, but the way they write it and the way Sheridan Smith plays it, and because the story moves at such a great pace, you have no problem accepting that Lucy would be that impulsive and that short-tempered that she's willing to hitch a lift with what other alien species she can get a hold of just to get away from the Doctor. And it's fun to see a companion just sass off to the Daleks. And I guess it's one of those cases where, because the companion's completely oblivious to them, she has no problem being, sassy with them, as opposed to companions who know about them and are immediately terrified of them, justifiably so. So if you're wondering why I'm being cagey about certain aspects of the plot, a lot of it involves Asha Griven. Now, another reason I strongly recommend people to kick off with this story, particularly if you're jumping into Big Finish with the Eighth Doctor, if you're a fan of the MCU, I actually would say make this one a must because Asha Griven is played by Hayley Atwell. That's right, Peggy Carter is in this story, and she is outstanding in it. The revelations regarding her character end up giving additional nuance at the right moments in the story, and it makes Hayley Atwell's performance so multi-layered. And the great thing about Big Finish, not just for Doctor Who, but for radio in general, is that it reminds people that radio can be a transcendent medium in order to get our entertainment. When it's well produced, when you have sound mixers that are really on top of their game, when you're listening to it, you have absolutely no problem visualizing what they're presenting you with. And when it's written well, when the dialogue is descriptive enough, but not overly so, it paints such a vivid picture with a combination of dialogue and sound where you can visualize the story with no problem whatsoever. And the writing on Blood of the Daleks is so good that, and the way they describe Red Rocket Rising and what a mess it is, even to the point when you hear little sizzles when they're getting rained on by acid rain, and you're hearing the the throng all mad and crazy and all that. It does a wonderful job setting the stage for you. And there's a great smorgasbord of characters, not just Haley Atwell, but you also have Eileen Clint, the elected official who's trying to help what's left of the colony. And then you also have a character named Tom Cardwell, who's a conspiracy theorist, who's one of the few people who actually remembers the Daleks and is trying to warn people about him. If you visualize those hermits who are paranoid about everything, wearing tinfoil hats, that's Tom Cardwell. And you'd think he's going to be an irritating character, but no, he's a fun character. And actually, as a nice cliche spin, normally when you see characters like this, you usually see them die like immediately, but he gets a lot of play throughout the course of the story, and he remains consistently entertaining and actually becomes a very stalwart ally throughout the course of the story. And that was a nice cliche spin. Steve Lyons does an excellent job, with the set of characters he's given, with describing the scale of this, because it does result in a really big battle at the dead end. This is where we're going to have to get into. In the Doctor's investigation, he finds out Asha Gryphon is, in fact, Professor Martez transferred his consciousness into her body. And you also find out that he actually summoned the Daleks there because he thought the Daleks were this, unjustly maligned race, and he wanted to summon them there so they can help him with his own work. What you find out is that he's actually turning the dead of Red Rocket Rising into his own species of Daleks. And that actually leads to one of the best moments in this episode when you see Martez with his Daleks, and then of course the Daleks we know and despise show up, and then you see this collision of these two rival species. It reminds you of the central reason why the Daleks are such a abhorrent species, because they pride above all else genetic perfection, believing that they are the superior species and that any deviation from it is an abomination. And for many fans of the classic series will remember there was a point in the latter years where the Daleks were even at war with other factions of Daleks who actually did genetically alter themselves, and some of them believed that they were impure and that they were wrong, so they started killing each other as a result of it. And you're seeing another angle of that, where you just have someone else who was smart enough to be able to recreate the technology, recreate the experiment, and create this new strain of Daleks. You're afraid that this is going to be rinse and repeat, like it's going to be a rehash of Genesis of the Daleks. The thing I gotta say about Blood of the Daleks, it actually feels in a way like kind of a spiritual sequel to that one, because here you have the Doctor actually being confronted with the exact same situation he was confronted with in Genesis of the Daleks, where he had the chance to avert their creation, but only did it so much to delay it, but realizing as time has gone on that may have been a bad move, that he should have just pulled that particular trigger when it happened. And now he's confronted with this decision yet again, and you see the way he plays it this go around. You definitely see that he has indeed learned from a lot of his mistakes from the past, and he, instead of going the route that you expect he's going to go, you think, yeah, he's going to blow stuff up again, only this time he's actually doing it a different way, where he actually tries to reason with Martez. And that is refreshing. Normally in Doctor Who, he always tries to reason with the big villain, and the villain, of course, doesn't listen. And that seems to be the way it's going to go. But then a point happens where Martez is on the crossroads. There does come a point in the story where Martez is confronted with the truth of the Daleks and has to take a long, hard look at what he's doing to come to a certain realization. And the way that plays out is absolutely wonderful, and it all culminates in this showdown at the dead end. It's between one Dalek and another Dalek, and the Doctor just staring at them both with this very sad thought that because he made the wrong decision a long time ago, history has unfortunately repeated itself. And now that he's seeing history kind of fold in on itself, he's just staring at the unfortunate truth that the Daleks will never learn, they will never evolve, they will never have any kind of instance of compassion, fear, or any sort of value of life, that all that's left behind is just a wasteland. And I know I'm making it sound like this is all going to lead to some dire ending, but when it comes to the Doctor and his relationship with the Daleks, it does make you feel, this air of sadness, particularly knowing what fans of the new series know in the future. So it's a really solid Dalek story, and of course it does reinforce one of the key things that we know about the Daleks and their obsession with keeping the blood pure. And somehow, even with this really big story with the Daleks, we're still able to work in this acrimonious relationship between the Eighth Doctor and Lucy, and the way that resolves on a very humorous note ends up springboarding into a wonderful first season with a solid new companion and the continuing adventures of a Doctor that, again, never got the chance to really prove himself on television. And because we have a relatable companion like Lucy Miller, she serves as a good audience surrogate to help a lot of new Doctor Who fans who are starting with Big Finish Radio to get to know a Doctor, which by and large is severely undervalued. So yes, I will definitely say Blood of the Daleks part 1, part 2 is an excellent place to start when you begin indulging in the Big Finish Radio plays. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you think that you should start with the Eighth Doctor's first story, Storm Warning? I can understand that. Or do you think that this is an excellent place to start? Leave it all, comments below. For more addictive content on Narcotic Casserole, simply like, share, subscribe, click. Thou shalt be served.